You are soaked, not a little damp. Soaked. The rain has been falling for hours. Your clothes cling to your skin. Your fingers are pruned. Your teeth are chattering. Hypothermia is not a distant possibility. It is a clock ticking in your chest. You need fire, but every piece of wood around you is dripping water. The ground is mud. The air is so thick with moisture that you can taste it. Your hands shake from the cold. How do you start a fire when everything is wet? For you, this is a survival nightmare. This is the kind of scenario that kills experienced hikers. But for your ancient ancestors, this was a problem they solved thousands of times. Not with a lighter, not with matches, with their hands, their knowledge, and materials they gathered from the landscape. And they did it in conditions that would make a modern survivalist weep. Let me start at the very beginning. The oldest universally accepted evidence of controlled fire use by early humans comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. In 2012, a team led by Francesco Berna at Simon Fraser University published a study showing that humans were using fire in this cave approximately 1 million years ago. They found ash, burned bone, and heat-altered sediment, all in a layer that predates the earliest known human fire-making tools by hundreds of thousands of years. 1 million years ago, your ancestors were already controlling fire. They were cooking food. They were staying warm. They were keeping predators away. They had already mastered one of the most complex and dangerous technologies ever invented. But here is the question that archaeologists have debated for decades. Did these early humans know how to make fire? Or did they just know how to keep it? Because keeping fire is easier than making it. If you find a natural fire from a lightning strike or a volcanic eruption, you can maintain it for years. You can carry embers from camp to camp. You can keep the fire alive even when you cannot make a new one. Ruth Shahak, Gross at the University of Haifa, has studied this question extensively. Her 2019 paper on the evolution of fire-making technologies suggests that early humans went through two distinct phases. In the first phase, which lasted hundreds of thousands of years, they were firekeepers, but not firemakers. They preserved natural fires and carried embers across long distances. In the second phase, which began perhaps 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, they became firemakers. They invented techniques for creating fire from scratch. This transition from firekeeping to firemaking was one of the most important technological advances in human history, because a firekeeper is tethered to their fire. If the fire goes out, they are helpless. A firemaker carries fire in their mind. As long as they have the right materials and knowledge, they can always make a new fire. So how did they make fire? The most widespread technique was friction. You rub two pieces of wood together until the friction generates enough heat to create an ember. There are several variations, each adapted to different environments. The simplest is the hand drill. You take a straight, dry stick and spin it rapidly between your palms against a flat piece of wood. The friction creates wood dust. The wood dust heats up. Eventually, a small glowing ember forms in the dust. You transfer this ember to a tinder bundle, blow on it gently, and you have fire. The hand drill sounds simple. It is not. It requires the right type of wood for both the spindle and the hearthboard. It requires the spindle to be perfectly straight and dry. It requires the right amount of downward pressure and the right spinning speed. It requires the hands to be coordinated and strong, and it requires practice. Lots of practice. A 2003 study by Kenneth Jones in the Bulletin of Primitive Technology documented the hand drill techniques of traditional peoples worldwide. Jones found that experienced practitioners could produce fire in under a minute with the right materials. Inexperienced practitioners often failed entirely. The bow drill is an improvement on the hand drill. Instead of spinning the spindle with your palms, you wrap a bowstring around the spindle and saw the bow back and forth. This produces faster rotation with less hand strain. The bow drill is more reliable than the hand drill. especially in cold or wet conditions where your hands may be numb and weak. The bow drill requires more components: a spindle, a hearthboard, a bow, a bearing block to hold the top of the spindle, and a tinder bundle. But it is more powerful. With a bow drill, you can generate higher temperatures and create embers faster. There is also the fire plow. You take a hard stick and rub it back and forth along a groove in a soft piece of wood. The friction creates heat and wood dust. The wood dust accumulates at the end of the groove and eventually forms an ember. The fire plow is less common than the hand drill or bow drill, but it was used by indigenous peoples in Oceania and parts of Asia. And then there is the strike-a-light method. Instead of friction, you strike a piece of iron pyrite, marcasite, or flint against another rock to create sparks. The sparks are hot enough to ignite dry tinder. This method is faster than friction, but requires specific rocks that may not be available in every environment. Now, let us talk about the most important component of fire making: tinder. Tinder is the material that catches the spark, or ember, and grows it into a flame. It must be dry, fibrous, and easy to ignite. The choice of tinder can mean the difference between a successful fire and a failed one. Ancient humans were masters of tinder selection. They knew which fungi, which barks, which plant fibers made the best tinder. They knew how to prepare it. They knew how to store it, and they knew how to use it, even in wet conditions. The most famous tinder in prehistory is amadou, made from the fungus fomentarius. This fungus grows on birch and beech trees across Eurasia. Its inner material, called the trama, is a dense mat of fibers that catches sparks easily and burns slowly, almost like a smoldering wick. Here is the remarkable thing about amadou: it works even when it is wet. A 2015 study in the journal Mycologist documented the properties of fomentarius. The fungus can absorb up to 400% of its weight in water without losing its ability to catch a spark. When you squeeze the water out, the fibers remain fibrous. When you strike a spark into the material, it ignites. Even after being soaked, this is why Fonsi, the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old mummy discovered in the Alps, was carrying amadou fungus in his fire kit. Tsotsi knew that if he got caught in a rainstorm, he could still make fire. He had the one material that burns even when wet. Twanthy fire kit was discovered with his body in 1991. It contained multiple types of tinder, including fomentarius, along with flint, iron pyrite, and various plant materials, all carried in a birch bark container. Watsi was prepared for wet conditions. He knew that survival depended on being able to make fire in any weather. But what about the wood itself? If all the wood around you is wet, how do you start a fire? The answer is that ancient humans knew where to find dry wood even in the wettest environments. Dead standing trees are the best source. A tree that died years ago but is still standing has been dried by wind and sun. The outer layer may be wet from rain, but the inner heartwood is often completely dry. You can strip away the wet outer layer. The inner heartwood of dead trees is protected by the bark and the outer layers of dead wood. It can remain dry for years, even in rainy climates. Ancient humans knew this. They looked for dead standing trees, not fallen logs. They knew that fallen logs absorbed moisture from the ground. Standing trees shed water. Birch bark is another secret weapon for wet weather fire making. Birch bark contains a waterproof resin called betulin. This resin makes birch bark resistant to water and highly flammable, even when soaking wet. If you peel a sheet of birch bark from a living or dead birch tree, you can crumple it into a fire-starting bundle that ignites easily, even in the rain. A 2018 study of traditional fire-making materials found that birch bark has one of the highest flammability ratings of any natural material, wet or dry. The betulin resin creates a waterproof barrier that allows the bark to burn even when the outer surface is covered in water. Punk wood, the soft, decayed wood found at the center of rotting logs, is another valuable material. Punk wood can be dried and worked into a material that catches sparks easily. It is like nature's charcoal. Now let us talk about the actual technique of starting a fire in the rain. Ancient humans did not try to start a fire in the open. They found shelter, a rock overhang, a dense thicket, a fallen tree with a dry space underneath. They created a dry workspace before they tried to create fire. They also prepared their tinder in advance. Good tinder was stored in a waterproof container, a birch bark pouch, a hollowed piece of wood, a leather bag sealed with fat. The tinder was kept dry and ready, even when everything else was wet. They used fire steel or flint and pyrite to create sparks. A single spark is enough to ignite amadou or prepared tinder. Once the tinder is glowing, they transferred it to a carefully constructed nest of progressively larger fuel. First tiny twigs, then small branches, then larger wood. Each layer had to be dry enough to catch. And if all else failed, they carried fire with them. Archaeological evidence from Paleolithic Europe shows that humans transported burning embers across long distances. They carried fire in specially crafted containers, sometimes in hollowed horns, sometimes in clay pots, sometimes in bark trays lined with wet clay and filled with smoldering embers. A 2014 study from the University of Tübingen found evidence of ember transport at the Scheiningen site in Germany, dating to 300,000 years ago. The researchers found hearths that had been repeatedly relit from embers brought from other locations. These early humans were not making new fire every time. They were carrying it. This changed the relationship between humans and fire. Fire was no longer something that happened when conditions were right. Fire was something you carried with you, always. It was a possession. There is a haunting image from the island of Tasmania, when the last Tasmanian Aboriginal people were removed from their land in the 19th century. They were observed carrying smouldering fire sticks with them. They never let their fire go out, because once it went out, they might not be able to make it again in the wet Tasmanian wilderness. They carried fire in their hands across rivers, through rainstorms for days and weeks at a time. The fire was never allowed to die. Now, let me bring this back to you. You are sitting in a heated room, reading this on a device powered by electricity. You have never needed to make fire. You turn a dial, push a button, and warmth appears. You have no idea what it means to be cold and unable to get warm. Your ancestors knew. They knew that fire was life. They knew that losing fire could mean losing your life. They knew that rain, snow, and wet wood were not excuses. They were challenges to be solved, and they solved them with a piece of fungus, with a strip of birch bark, with knowledge passed down across thousands of generations. The next time you flick a lighter and watch a flame appear, think about the million years of human ingenuity that made that moment possible. Think about the hands that spun the first fire drill. Think about the person who first squeezed water out of amadou and struck a spark into it. Think about Tsitsi, walking through the Alps 5,300 years ago, carrying a piece of fungus in his pouch, ready for rain. You carry fire in a machine. They carried fire in their minds, and their version never ran out of fuel. Let me take you into the Arctic. Because if you think it is hard to make fire in a rainstorm, try making fire when everything is frozen. In the Arctic, wood is scarce. The trees that exist are stunted and twisted. The ground is permafrost. Temperatures can drop to 50 degrees below zero. Starting a fire in these conditions seems impossible, but the Inuit and other Arctic peoples developed techniques that worked. They carried dry tinder in waterproof pouches made from seal intestine. They used animal fat as a fuel source. A seal oil lamp, called a colic, provided light, heat, and a cooking surface for hours on a single filling. The colic was not just a fire, it was a hearth. It was the center of the home. In the rainforests of South America, indigenous peoples developed different techniques. The humidity was the enemy. Everything rots. Everything molds. Nothing stays dry for long. They stored their fire-making materials in bamboo tubes, which are naturally waterproof. The sealed nodes of bamboo create airtight chambers that keep tinder dry for months. In the deserts of Australia, Aboriginal people used spinifex grass as tinder. Spinifex is a tough, spiky grass that grows in arid regions. It is coated in a resin that makes it highly flammable. Even in dry conditions, spinifex ignites instantly. It was the perfect desert fire starter. Now let me talk about something that most modern people do not realize. Making fire is not just a physical skill. It is a social skill. In many traditional societies, fire-making was a specialized knowledge held by specific individuals. Not everyone could do it. The people who could were valued members of the community. A 2016 ethnographic study of the Ache people of Paraguay documented their fire-making practices. The Ache used a simple hand drill, but not everyone could make fire successfully. The skill required practice, patience, and the right touch. Young men would spend hours practicing their fire-making technique. Being able to make fire quickly was a mark of competence and maturity. This social dimension of fire-making is often overlooked. Fire was not just a tool, it was a source of status, a marker of skill, a reason for respect. Now, let me talk about the deeper relationship between fire and the human brain. Fire changed us. Not just physically, but cognitively. The invention of cooking made possible by fire allowed our brains to grow larger because cooked food provides more energy with less digestive effort. Our brains expanded, our cognition improved, our social structures became more complex. But fire also changed the way we think about the world. A campfire at night created a social space that did not exist before. People gathered around the fire. They talked, they told stories, they sang, they shared knowledge. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner studied this phenomenon among the Juhohansi Bushmen of the Kalahari. She found that daytime conversations were mostly practical: hunting, gathering, disputes, gossip. But nighttime conversations around the fire were different. They shifted to stories, songs, ceremonies, and spiritual matters. More than 80% of fireside talk was about things that were not immediately practical. Fire created a space for imagination, for storytelling, for passing down cultural knowledge. The fire was not just warmth. It was the first theater, the first classroom, the first place where humans gathered to share ideas. Now let me return to the practical question. How did ancient humans make fire with wet wood? There is one more technique I have not mentioned: the fire piston. The fire piston is a device that uses rapid compression of air to create heat. You have a hollow tube, a piston that fits tightly inside, and some tinder at the bottom of the tube. You slam the piston into the tube, compressing the air rapidly. The compressed air heats up to several hundred degrees, hot enough to ignite the tinder. The fire piston was used by indigenous peoples in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. It works even with wet materials, because the heat comes from compressed air, not from friction between wet surfaces. It is a remarkable invention that demonstrates a deep understanding of the physics of heat and pressure. But the fire piston is rare. Most ancient humans relied on friction and percussion methods, and these methods worked even in wet conditions, as long as the practitioner had the right knowledge and materials. A 1999 study from the University of Cambridge examined the fire-making abilities of traditional peoples in wet tropical forests. The researchers found that experienced firemakers could successfully produce fire in rain conditions approximately 70% of the time. The key was preparation: having dry tinder stored in waterproof containers, having the right wood, having the skill to work quickly before the materials absorbed too much moisture. Now let me tell you about one more piece of ancient fire technology: the fire saw. The fire saw is used in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Instead of drilling, you saw a piece of soft wood with a sharp piece of hard wood, like a sawing motion. The friction creates wood dust that ignites. The fire saw is particularly effective in wet conditions because the sawing motion is vigorous enough to generate heat faster than moisture can cool it. The diversity of fire-making techniques across different cultures is staggering. Hand drill, bow drill, fire plow, fire saw, striker light, fire piston. Each technique is a solution to the same problem, adapted to the specific materials available in that environment. And all of them were developed without any formal scientific training, without any written instructions, without any YouTube tutorials. They were developed through observation, experimentation, and transmission across generations. There is a lesson in this for you. The next time you are cold and the fire will not start, ask yourself, what did your ancestors do? They did not give up. They did not call for help. They found dry wood. They found good tinder. They used their hands and their knowledge. The difference between life and death in the ancient world was often just a spark. Your ancestors were experts at making that spark, and the knowledge is still available to you. All you have to do is learn it. There is a reason why fire is sacred in almost every human culture. It is not just because fire kept our ancestors warm. It is because fire represents something deeper, the ability to transform the world around us. Your ancestors looked at a piece of wet wood and saw potential fire. They looked at a fungus growing on a tree and saw tinder that could save their life. They looked at the rain and did not see an obstacle. They saw a challenge they had the knowledge to overcome. That knowledge is not lost. It is sitting in museums, in ethnographic records, in the hands of a few remaining traditional practitioners, and in your own DNA, because the brain that figured out how to spin a stick fast enough to create fire is the same brain you are using right now. You have the same ingenuity, the same problem-solving ability, the same capacity to look at a problem and find a solution. The next time you struggle with something difficult, remember the million years of fire-making that came before you. Remember that your ancestors solved problems that would kill most modern people, and they did it without any of the tools you take for granted. If they could make fire from wet wood, you can handle whatever is in front of you. The spark is already there. You just have to find the right tinder